Welcome to Go Get Great, the podcast for aspiring entrepreneurs and ambitious small business owners. I'm your host, Brittany, owner of Brittany Miller Socials and mother of 3. Go Get Great is all about helping you make life and business work together. You'll learn about the fumbles that helped get me and my guests to where we are today so you don't have to make them. So come join the journey with Go Get Great. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited. I have another friend on my podcast today. Lori is joining me, and Lori is an IBCLC. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So in non-technical terms, she's my lactation consultant, and she is also a soon-to-be sleep consultant. So we've got 2 huge topics that we can cover today, and I'm super excited to dive in. But Lori, I want to pass it off to you so you can fill in your introduction and tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you got to be a lactation and sleep consultant.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I've been loving listening to your podcast. So yeah, so I'm a mom of 6 grown children now, and I have 2 little grandsons. I've been a registered nurse for almost 30 years. And 4 years ago, when my first grandson was born, I was supporting my daughter in her breastfeeding journey, which got off to a rocky start. And, I didn't really know how to help her. My grandson was tongue-tied and lip-tied, and all of the very minute lactation training I got in my nursing career didn't prepare me to help her. But she persevered, and I was so inspired by her that afterwards we were looking back on all of it, and I was considering a career change, but still wanted to be in the helping profession. And she actually was the one that suggested that I become a lactation consultant. So I did some digging and found out about the IBCLC, which is the governing body of the IBCLC, which is International Board Certified Lactation Consultant, and started the process. So it was a 3-year process that included an education component, then a 500-hour internship that I did in Burlington with the incredible Addie Sandink, who's famous in the Burlington area, and then studying for a 4-hour intensive exam that they sit twice a year, wrote the exam, and waited 3 months for the results, passed, and then started my own practice. So it's been a whirlwind and a lot learning how to run my own business. I'm 50, starting over again and becoming an entrepreneur for the first time, but it's exciting, and I love the work. So I love babies and I love family. So I'm really excited about what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. And she's really good at what she does. So for those of you, so I guess pretty much everyone, I haven't really shared about this a lot lately, but my history with, breastfeeding was not a good one or an easy one. So Talia was born 3 years ago, and she at the time was having a lot of struggles latching, but I did not know that. And everyone around me was just like, it'll get better, you'll get used to it. Everything is fine. And I was like, I am literally in tears trying to feed my child because it hurts me so much to put her on my boob. And I'm like tearing up saying this because it was so painful. And I felt like such a failure as a mom, and I didn't know what to do. Like, we're told that, motherhood is natural, and, your baby arrives and they just know what to do, and you're just supposed to magically step into this whole new role. And when it doesn't happen exactly like that, which I feel like for most is pretty much all the time, yes, they didn't know what to do. And the concept of like a lactation consultant was really foreign to me. Like, I didn't know that was a thing or someone that I could go and see to help fix these problems. So I struggled to feed Talia for probably about 6 months. And then I finally went to the doctor, and I was like, I can't. Like, she actually threw up blood at one point, and we had to take her to the hospital because we didn't know what was wrong. Like, I couldn't see that I was bleeding. I just knew that it hurt, but she was actually drawing blood when she was feeding, and eventually she threw up blood. So after that, I went to the doctor, and my family doctor actually told me that it was the worst she had ever seen. Talia had taken chunks out of my nipples, and that I was supposed to stop breastfeeding immediately so that my body could heal from the extended trauma that I had caused it. So, and I love my mom dearly, but I feel like there was a lot of pressure and stigma there around her opinions of what I should be doing for my child, because she had struggled to breastfeed as well. And even hearing that, I don't think she really believed what the doctor was saying. And like, I was trying to come up with some sort of scapegoat to get out of this. So I ended up pumping for Talia for several months after that. And it was like kind of a fun, like a fine compromise. It wasn't painful and she was still getting breast milk. And that was my goal. I wanted to breastfeed her, but I didn't want to inflict that much pain on myself. So that was my really bad experience the first time. And then the second time and third time, I kind of went into it with a little bit of hesitation. And my milk supply actually dried up with Rhea at about 6 weeks. So I couldn't feed her. That was probably, looking back on it now, was due to lack of water intake and poor nutrition. But I didn't know that. And it was just gone. So she was formula fed. And with Rhett, I've been pumping exclusively for the last 3 months. And it's been really working. And I noticed that I am a much happier mom doing it this way than I was trying to struggle to breastfeed Talia. So that was kind of my experience. But I knew right from the get-go with Rhett that I wanted to go to Lori and have her help me figure out the best way to feed him that was going to A, work with my lifestyle, but B, not cause the same level of pain that I was feeling. Because even after 24 hours, we hadn't even left the hospital and I was sore. So Lori, can you share what we did? I think you called it an initial consult in that case.
Yeah, we had an initial consult. But before that, the story that you just told, Brittany, I hear that all of the time. And to be honest with you, that was my experience as well with my 6 children. I breastfed 5 of them with varying degrees of, I'll use the word success, I guess. So in terms of how long I breastfed them for. And now looking back with the knowledge that I have now, the education and the clinical experience, I can see how every single one of them could have been so different. My first daughter, I did not breastfeed. I was a teenager when I had her. I was 18. And breastfeeding was not part of my family culture. All the women formula fed their babies, bottle fed and formula fed. And a cousin who I absolutely adored and still do, sun rises and sets on her. When I had mentioned about breastfeeding, she said, "Ew, gross." And that put an end to that in my head. So, and I, and I really, I regret that. I do regret not giving it a chance. But yeah, the story that you're telling is one that I hear all the time. And it's too bad because with early intervention, everything can be helped. So, but so we connected early before you'd even had Rhett, and you were helping me with some social media stuff. And then after he was born, you came to see me and we did an initial visit. So in an initial visit, lactation visit, it's about 2 hours, sometimes just under, sometimes 2.5, depending on the complexity of the problems or challenges that are being faced. And we just start with a history. I weigh the baby naked to get a baseline weight. Then we weigh the baby dressed. Then the baby latches. I know your appointment looked a little bit different, but then we get the baby latching. I help with that, do some guidance with that. Yeah. And then I weigh the baby again to see how much milk they transferred. And then we make a plan and we go from there. I assess the baby. I do a full oral assessment. I do the reflex assessment. I look at the whole baby and the whole mother, because breastfeeding isn't a nipple going into a baby's mouth. It's the whole mom that's breastfeeding the whole baby, and how we can make those two things, or two people, not things, two people work together. And everybody's unique too. So I can't really do a lot of research ahead of time or anything. I just meet people in the waiting room and then we figure it out together as we go. I learn something from every single one, everybody who comes. I learn something new, and I do really enjoy what I'm doing. So sometimes the problems are fairly simple, and one visit is all that's needed. I do give really great follow-up, but through via text or email or phone calls. And then sometimes the problems are more complex and we need to have some follow-up visits afterwards. And then sometimes things are great, and then around the 3-month mark, there's a change, which is normal in the breastfeeding journey, and we have another appointment just to deal with those new challenges. But yeah, women are really sold a story about what this is going to look like. This baby's going to be born vaginally, and then they're going to come up onto their chest, and they're going to latch beautifully, and then they're going to sleep, and then suckle, and then sleep, and then suckle. That's going to be this wonderful mat leave, and the reality is that it looks very, very different. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You don't have to tell that to moms that have had kids, just the ones that don't. But I wanted to kind of have you share what an initial visit looks like, because even if you're at a point where you are breastfeeding and things seem to be going well, I feel like there's still a lot of value in going to see Lori and having one of those visits with her, because she looks at so much more, and she'll give you like different feeding positions because after like 2 or 3 weeks, your baby is much larger, and the cross feed technique that they teach you in the hospital, doesn't really work when the baby is bigger than your like shoulder width now.
Yeah. And actually, one of my go-to positions, although I have several for that newborn phase, is the laid back breastfeeding position. Because what I've learned in my studies and then in my clinical experience is that babies are born with primitive feeding reflexes. These are reflexes that live in the brain, and truthfully, they're survival reflexes. So if we can trigger those reflexes by having the baby on the mom in a full frontal contact position, then it sends a message to the brain saying it's time to feed, it's time to tilt your head back a little bit and open your mouth nice and wide and take in as much breast tissue to get a nice deep latch. And to be honest, often that's the major fix because we are taught this, you're going to hunch over for a half an hour over a breastfeeding pillow, wrestling this baby with their head in all these weird positions that we as adults would never think to drink water with our head to the side, with our chin tucked down towards our chest, like all these crazy positions. So a lot of times positioning, I do get moms that come just for that. I do have gift certificates available for my services. So that's given as a baby shower gift or a new baby gift often. So those moms will come to me, and sometimes it's just a one-time consult just to get the positioning down pat, to know what to expect, what's normal. I do, like I said, I do a full exam of the baby, not just their mouth, but their whole body. So I might make some suggestions for little oral exercises or some tummy time or another exercise called guppy, just some things to release tension that is in the baby's body that might be making breastfeeding difficult. And not just breastfeeding, sometimes bottle feeding is difficult too, depending on where the baby might be holding tension. Looking at all of that, I can put it all together to help make feeding easier for both mom and baby.
I noticed that. Well, I didn't necessarily notice that, but Lori pointed that out when I brought Rhett in for his consult, and he seemed to favor the one side, and he would always turn really well that way. So then it was a case of working with him to get him to turn a little bit more the other way. So there is a lot more to just feeding than what she does. But that is, I feel like as a new mom, that is our biggest concern. Like we need to get our baby fed, and everything else is just like white noise in the background.
Oh yeah, for sure. That is my baby getting enough? And milk supply. So some women struggle with building a milk supply. Some people lose their milk, and then we have to recover their milk for whatever reason. But yeah, that is the number one worry always. How do I know how much they're getting? How do I know if they're satisfied? I don't think I'm making as much milk. So we actually have a really high initiation rate for breastfeeding in Canada and in Ontario. I think, please don't quote me on this number, but it's around 90%, somewhere around 90% of women after their baby's born, they intend to breastfeed for some length of time. They intend to breastfeed. But when we look at it, the same breastfeeding rates at a month, just 4 weeks later, the number drops down to less than half of that. And the number one reason is sore nipples, nipple pain, or breast conditions, engorgement, mastitis, breast abscesses. That's another whole topic. And the second one right behind it is milk supply. So either true low milk supply or perceived low milk supply. So seeing a lactation consultant and sorting out whether milk supply is truly an issue. If it is, how do we correct that problem? And if it's not, teaching about normal hunger cues and normal amounts that, the average baby takes and that kind of thing. And just having the weights, that can be really reassuring too.
And it's like, I am a type A personality, I guess. And like, I very much need to know that my child is actually getting as much food as they should be. And for me, that was my biggest concern about breastfeeding. I cannot physically see the intake. It's not like, there's an empty tank light by the time they're done drinking to know that they've got what they need to. And there's just so many question marks. And I'm not saying that that's why I chose to bottle feed any of my kids. It was other reasons. But once I made that switch, it was kind of nice to have the visual representation. But perceived low milk supply was a huge issue for me too. I thought that was why Talia was hungry all the time. And, eventually that probably became the problem, but it didn't start that way just because she wasn't latching well. But then Lori has explained that the body replenishes a supply. So if she's not emptying it because she's not drinking, then my body wasn't producing it. And even though we attempted to correct her latch problems later, it was too late in the game for my milk supply. And I didn't know you could even bring it back. So what are some of your best recommendations to helping women kind of keep and maintain that supply?
So as soon as the baby's born, in that first hour, there's a cascade of hormonal changes that are happening in the mother's body when the placenta is delivered. There's, it's a very complex dance, but it's prime. That first hour is the prime time to start laying down the foundation for building a milk supply. So what I usually teach in my prenatal breastfeeding classes is let's let the baby latch. And the best way is if they'll give you time, if you're having a hospital birth, for the breast crawl, which is when the baby is laid on your abdomen just slightly below the breast, and they're given time to work their way towards the breast and self-attach. That doesn't always happen because we need to get mom up to the postpartum unit and get the next mom in that bed. But if baby can latch in that first hour, that's great. If they can't, then start hand expressing. And most women take my prenatal breastfeeding class somewhere around the 33rd week, finishing up around their 37-week pregnancy. And I always have them start around 36 weeks pregnant, practicing hand expression. I send lots of videos. Every woman's anatomy is a bit different, so there's not a one technique is the way to do it. There are certainly some things that you shouldn't do, and I give them that, but just to start practicing and get used to that, so that if for some reason the baby doesn't feed in that first hour, they can get started doing some hand expressing. But if they can't in that time, all's not lost. So I've had moms who are 5 weeks postpartum and have had very little nipple stimulation, even later than that, 8-9 weeks postpartum, and we can recover. Most often we can recover their milk. They might need some other interventions, some herbs, or even some medication. Yeah, but we can get it going. Yeah, so I would say my first thing is let's lay down the good foundation for milk supply by getting some nipple stimulation, some breast stimulation. And then if the baby's being supplemented, make sure that it's just small amounts, and understand that your baby's stomach is only about the size of a chair, and it's very rigid when they're first born. It doesn't have a lot of elasticity, not until the mid to late part of that first week of life. So they really only need tiny, small amounts. They like 2 mLs is all they need, which is half of a teaspoon at a time. And that first milk is full of really concentrated sugars and things for their immune system, antibodies and such, but it's also got a lot of laxative in it, because when you have your baby, that first few poops in those first few days are the meconium poops, that dark black tarry poop. So nature's way of helping pass that through their intestines is to provide them with this natural laxative through their mom's breast milk, and they get that often. So baby's pooping a lot, so then they're hungry a lot, and they've got a little tiny stomach. So people will think, oh, I must have a low milk supply because my baby wants to eat every hour. It's like, actually, they're just doing exactly what they're supposed to. So yeah.
Okay. And I've heard too, and maybe this came from you, but do you recommend that women actually start expressing colostrum before the baby arrives, so they have some that they can bring to the hospital in extenuating circumstances?
Yeah. So you should check with your midwife or OBGYN. I don't know, for people that are listening, I'm not sure what your medical history is, or if there's a reason why maybe you should not be doing any nipple stimulation before you go into labor or you're closer to your due date. But for the most part, yes, it's safe from 36 weeks on to start expressing colostrum and freezing it. And then you can bring that to the hospital in case maybe you have a sleepy baby, or maybe you end up having a C-section that you weren't planning, or maybe your baby's separated from you, or maybe you have a big baby that's over 4,000 grams and they are having trouble keeping their blood sugar up, and, giving them that pre-expressed colostrum can really help to support them through that time. But yeah, so I would encourage anyone who's interested in that to do some research. Take a prenatal breastfeeding class if you can. And we should circle back to that research part, because there's so much misinformation out there. And also just to check in with your OBGYN or your midwife and make sure that they give the go-ahead.
So prenatal classes are available from what I understand, electronically through the Southwest Public Health Unit, or they can take a class with you and they would find you online. How?
Yes. Yep. So if you go to my website, which is birthwisewellness.com, you can register online. I do a whole childbirth series with the prenatal breastfeeding class, which is 4 weeks long, or you can take just the breastfeeding class, which is just one evening live via Zoom, 2 hours, sometimes 2.5, depending on how talkative people are and how many questions they have. I do send a ton of resources and everything afterwards as well. And if they don't live in the London, St. Thomas, Elgin area, often I have a network of IBCLCs in other parts of Ontario. Well, and actually I'm part of kind of a worldwide IBCLC group. So I can usually, if they're having trouble after their baby's born, they send me a text and tell me I can I can get them the help they need. So
Yeah, that's great. But speaking of and misinformation that's out there, what's your take on milk supply supplements like fenugreek and lactation cookies? Do they actually work?
So lactation cookies, if it's a great recipe and they taste delicious, go for it. A lot of times there's oats in them, which are part of a lactogenic diet. Do they increase supply? I think if you already have a decent supply, you might get a little boost from it. If you're truly struggling with low milk supply for whatever reason, they're not going to do much. And fenugreek used to be the herb of choice and still is, mostly amongst some midwife groups. But studies have shown now that if a woman is having trouble with her thyroid, which a lot of women do, and they don't realize it's a subclinical problem with making enough thyroid hormone, that actually fenugreek can damage their milk, can make their milk supply worse. So there's so many other herbs out there. The other thing with fenugreek, it can upset your stomach and it can upset the baby's stomach. There's just enough cons to using fenugreek, and there's so many other herbs that are good that don't have those same cons, that there's better things that you can take out there. Some women take fenugreek and they have no problem, and that's fine. But I think if anybody's taking fenugreek and they're not seeing the results they want, or if they see a decrease in their milk supply, then eliminate the fenugreek. You might see it come back up.
So are you able to share some of the herbs and things that can help women boost their milk supply, or is it more of like an individual case by case basis?
Yeah, no, actually, there's a company that I have some stock with. They're a Canadian company, which I love. I love supporting our as local as we can. Now they're in, I think, Alberta, I believe. They're still in Canada. So they're called Rumina Naturals, and they make a couple of products that I really like. So one is called Milk of Plenty, and there are 4 herbs in it, and I cannot. So shatavari, moringa, vervain, and I cannot think of the 4th one right now. But they all work together, helping to increase milk supply, and they work in different ways. Some of them are very calming to the mother's nervous system, which is important for the letdown reflex and promoting oxytocin hormone in the bloodstream. Some of them help build milk tissue, milk-making glandular tissue. Some help control blood sugar. A lot of women don't realize that if they have trouble controlling their blood sugar, even if they're not diabetic, but if they have a little bit subclinical insulin resistance, that can affect their milk supply, which brings me to their second product, which is called Goat's Rue, which is a product that I usually recommend if a mom, I suspect she might have trouble with insulin resistance or is diabetic, is diagnosed as a diabetic, because it's the same Goat's Rue is the root of a medication called metformin that they treat diabetics with. And sometimes that can help tell the milk-making glands to make milk. So there's an insulin receptor on the milk-making sacs in the cells, and it can help with that process. So
okay.
Now, some other things, though, and you mentioned it at the beginning, absolutely hydration. So, drinking lots of water, just drink to quench your thirst. You don't have to drink 3 liters of water or, make sure you're drinking 2 liters of water. Just drink to make sure that you're quenching your thirst. And if you're seeing, sometimes getting some electrolytes in there. So there's some different electrolyte powders that you can add to your water. Or if you're fine with the sugar, having Gatorade, I think Gatorade makes a half and half, half sugar, half non-sugar Gatorade now, but getting our Powerade, whatever, any of those energy drinks, those can help. Yeah, balancing. I do think one thing that I really like to do is if a mom is really struggling with her milk supply and she has the means, is for her to see a naturopath. because I find the naturopaths test for more things, and they're good at recommending the right herbs, the targeted herbs for people. So
okay. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. If a woman doesn't want to take some of those products that you mentioned because they're, supplements or whatever, what can they do naturally? So just obviously watching your water intake, I think for me is a big one. I notice that on days that I don't drink as much, the next day my supply is lower. So it's not like an immediate impact. It's a bit of a delay. And then just like nourishing myself, obviously. So I had talked to my nurse practitioner, I think, about this, and your body will automatically give to the baby, even if you don't necessarily have enough for yourself. So your baby will always be well fed, even if you're not feeding yourself. But then in my mind, this is self-care. So where the self-care comes into play, well, eventually, if you're not feeding yourself, then you're going to be really low energy. And the more low energy you are, the harder it is for you to do the things that you need to do to look after yourself. And if you're not looking after yourself, you can't look after your baby as well. So there are a lot of other, I feel like, environmental and lifestyle factors that can carry into some of this. And I think stress is a big one. We were talking about this earlier. Stress can actually impact your milk supply, right?
Absolutely. Stress does impact milk supply. So oxytocin is one of there's many hormones that contribute to milk supply, but oxytocin is the hormone that tells your body to let down the milk, the letdown reflex. So you can have milk there, but if oxytocin is not working properly, the milk's not coming out of your nipple pore and getting to the baby. And some of the things that block oxytocin are fatigue, stress, pain, anxiety,
so all the things new moms face.
That's right. Exactly. So we really do have to be taking good care of ourselves. And the other part about looking after your nutrition and your hydration is you want to make sure that you're absorbing as much nutrient from the food that you're eating as possible. So after a woman delivers her baby, her intestines, the villi, which are the little hairy bits, I guess is how I'll explain it, in the intestines, actually increase in size by 4 times so that they can absorb that much more nutrient from mom's diet. But if you're not feeding yourself a good nutrient dense diet, then there's not much nutrient to absorb. So yes, you will feel fatigued and you will feel dragged out and you will have a hard time coping with sleep deprivation and all of those things. So the best thing that you can do, and it doesn't have to be fancy, expensive meals. It can be just having some really good high quality snacks too. So lots of nuts and seeds and fruits and vegetables and that kind of thing that you can snack on during the day, because you only need about 500 extra calories per baby for your milk supply. You are absolutely right. There are certainly women who have lived with food insecurity, are not as privileged as some other women are, and they're not getting enough to eat, and they can still breastfeed, but it does cost them. It costs them more than women who are well nourished and well hydrated.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, motherhood is a challenge no matter what background you come from. It just, the step into motherhood, especially from 0 to 1, is a lot. So the more that you can kind of set yourself up for success, the better the experience is going to be for you. And I think that's part of the reason why, I keep having more kids. I have very easy pregnancies. And although I did struggle with breastfeeding with Talia, it wasn't enough to darken the experience, so to speak. It was still like an overall good experience and I enjoyed it. So I keep having more kids. But if you're a woman that struggles with breastfeeding and looking after yourself during that time, then yeah, having a kid feels like a huge thing for you and you're probably less likely to do it. So I like to try and spread awareness about, what you can do to kind of make it an easier experience, because I find being a mom very rewarding. Obviously, you feel the same. You have 6 children. It was like, I keep telling people I want 4 and they look at me like I have 3 heads. It was like, if I started telling people I wanted 6, I don't know, they might like kick me off the island or something if we're in survivor mode.
Yes, it is unusual to have as many children as I do, but I loved being pregnant, and I had fairly easy postpartum periods, and that first year was, wonderful. And yeah, same as you. I understand why you would be hooked, but I always tell people that transition to 1 and sometimes the transition to 3, because now, like when you have 2, you're not outnumbered, And then the transition to 3, but then they kind of entertain themselves and play amongst themselves. And I will tell you, my children are older now. They're all adults, and nothing brings me more joy than when they get together spontaneously, either in like just 2 of them, or sometimes in larger groups of them. They'll get together and have a sibling night, they call it. And it makes me so happy to know that they do that. They're really each other's, best friends in a lot of ways. So
I'll get back to you about how it is transitioning to 3 when Rhett gets older. I feel like the first 6 months with a baby, I don't want to say is easy because it's challenging in its own way, but is easier because there's only 2 to chase and 1 that's stationary. And then once the 3rd one starts moving, then it might get a little crazier then.
Yeah, that's right. I know when you have your first baby, you're like, oh, I can't wait until they sit up. I can't wait until they crawl. I can't wait until they walk. And then after that, it's like, I don't care if they ever walk and crawl or talk.
Yeah, it's like you can just take your time, it'll be fine. So like with Talia, I was like, okay, let's do all the things to like help her walk on schedule, quote unquote. And with Rhea, I was like, no, it's cool, like you can just do your own thing. And then it was Rhea that walked at like 7-8 months. I think it was 8 months, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me, I literally did nothing to encourage this is punishment.
I know. And that, that's part of the stress of mothering, and certainly as a new mother. Not that, I mean, every child is different, but we really stress about hitting these targets, these weight targets, these timing, these developmental milestone targets and all of that. And they're important, but it's really important to know that they're a guideline, and every baby is different and they get there on their own time. There's certainly things that we can do that slow that process down. We want to give the baby lots of opportunity to be doing movement. We live in a container culture where we have all these different containers to put a baby in, which isn't really that great for their development. It's not that we can't put them in the container. Of course, we have to. We want them to be safe, but they should be spending at least an equal amount of time outside of a container and, trying to wiggle around and move around and be on us, on our chests, and just on the floor, on the bed, whatever, supervised, of course.
I have a question for you. So we live in, like you said, a container culture, but we also live in a hustle culture, unfortunately, as sad as that is to say out loud. So what do you recommend for moms to help balance that? Because like I know with me specifically, like Grayson was home for the first 6 weeks when Rhett was here, which was absolutely amazing. And he was a great baby. So I was very fortunate. But now it's often really hard for couples to take time away, even just one parent to take a maternity leave or a paternity leave due to the financial constraints that we're all in right now with the rapid inflation and things like that we've seen this year. So do you have any tips for new moms of kind of how to balance life and business now that they have a baby? Because, they may not be able to take the time away that they'd like.
Yeah. And I can remember that because I had my last 5 children, really one after the other, I was not able to take a full maternity leave for any of them until the last one. And so I can remember struggling with that. And I was always searching for this routine. I started and failed, I suppose. So many routines, trying to figure out this way that I could have it all. That I could do it all, be everything to everybody. And at the end of the day, you just have to have a framework for how you think your day or your week should go. Understand that things might happen that are going to put a kibosh in your plans, and just try to spend as much time with your kids as you can. Even if you're just like, it depends on where you work. If you work outside of the home, make sure when you come home that you get that quality time. Put your phone away. Just pay attention to the kids, build those attachments. If you have people who can help you, if there's grandparents around or you've got older siblings around that can help you, or really good friends, and you can do some swapping of childcare so that you know that your kids are with people who love them and they can become attached to, that's great. But I'm going to say, and I'm going to tap into my palliative care because that was my work in my other life before I retrained. And I'm going to tell you that my time spent with people who were at the end of their life, all that they ever talk about are their experiences and their relationships with their loved ones. Not one of them ever talked about how clean they kept their home, how wonderful the meals were that they cooked. Sometimes if cooking and baking were their thing. but nobody ever talked about how clean their house was or how perfect their lawn was or, how many cars they had or anything that really had anything to do with that. So I think if you find that you're in a place where you're sacrificing family and your own self-care for things that really, they just really don't matter in life, then you have to reevaluate. So I'll tell you a bit of a personal story. So my mother died 16 years ago when my kids were quite young. She was diagnosed with breast cancer at 51 and died at 55. And in that time period, my husband and I had bought a house, which was a money pit. But we loved it and we still live in it. And we had planned on doing this quite a big renovation, ripping off basically the back of the house and adding a kitchen and all these things to it. And we had plans drawn up. We hadn't signed any contracts or even really had gotten to that phase where we had contractors yet, but we had plans and I worked quite a few hours, even though I had all these kids. I worked 12-hour night shifts, permanent nights at St. Joe's in London. And my husband has his own business and he worked 60, 70 hours a week as entrepreneurs do and sole proprietorships do. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and then my mother got sick and she died. And that really caused me to reevaluate my life, which a lot of people do when something like that happens to them, and think about their values and their priorities and their own mortality. And something that occurred to me was that I said that my kids and my family were the most important thing to me, that they were my top priority and my top value. Yet that's not how I spent the majority of my time. How I spent the majority of my time was working so that I could pay for this renovation that we didn't really need. We had a kitchen, we had a kitchen that worked. It was ugly and old, but it was functional. And when we really, really looked at it, there were ways for us to reduce our working hours so that we could spend more time at home with our kids. Now, I am going to have to work long after most people retire because I did go down to part-time and gave up a pension and all of that. Mm-hmm. But I don't regret it at all because I spent a lot of time at home with my kids. I still worked. I didn't stop working. I continued to work night shifts. I just didn't work full-time anymore. And I don't regret any of that at all. Now, I understand that I had the luxury of having a dual income and, I was a registered nurse, so I made a good hourly rate, and that not everybody has that they don't have a sort of a disposable income or some leeway in their income. So for those people, I was raised by a single mother, so I know what it's like to have to hustle just to make the rent. I would just say, try to keep things as simple as you can. You don't have to do big, expensive things with your kids. They don't have to be in a million different extracurricular activities. Just be there. Just hang out with them. And if you're tired because you've worked, it's okay to put the TV on and watch a Disney movie together, but just really watch it with them. Don't have your phone out and be scrolling on your phone. Try to rest when you can. Don't worry about your house being clean. Nobody cares, like as long as it's not, the health unit's going to come and condemn it. So, it's good enough. Good enough is okay. Yeah, I'm gonna. That was a really good question. I'm gonna have to give that a lot of thought to see if I have anything else to say. Was that a helpful answer? Being a young mom at the beginning.
It's really good. And you know what? I cared way more than I needed to about how clean my house was for my in-laws and things like that to come and visit. And you know what? It was the middle of a freaking pandemic and no one came over.
I know.
So my priorities were not aligned back then. And that's something that I actually worry about still to this day, is like I constantly say, my kids are my top priority, much like you. But, at the end of the day, if I really sit down and think about, how much time did I actually spend with my kids? And yes, they were not today because they're at mom's, but they were around me all the time. But like, how much one-on-one attention did they really get from me that day? Did I sit down and color with them? Did I do a puzzle with them? Was I looking at them do the same thing 600 times because that's, what they think is really funny because mommy laughed the first time? And, a lot of days, I'm not going to lie, I'm not really impressed with the outcome and the evaluation that I give myself on it. And it's hard. It's a struggle. I'm not going to lie, because my concern is I have to keep the roof over our heads because I feel like that's my obligation as a parent. And yes, it is. But my obligation as a parent is also to teach and to grow and to provide, emotional support and like time and attention. And I feel like that's a constant struggle. I don't really know that there is this magic balance term that everyone keeps saying is out there, but I try. And I try and make sure that I have at least 10 to 20 minutes of one-on-one time with each kid each day, which when you think about it is not a whole heck of a lot. But, some days that's the highest benchmark I can set for myself. And yeah, you do the best you can, but making
And
sure that you're at least aware of that, I think is a big thing.
and you use the exact perfect words were that you try, and 10 to 20 quality minutes where they have your undivided full attention is so important, and it's enough. And if you've got family around who can help you, it doesn't all have to fall on your shoulders. If you've got grandparents or aunts and uncles, or somebody who can help in the raising of these children, because in other times, not that long ago, even 100 years ago, and certainly in other cultures, the entire family participates in the raising of these children. And everybody's heard that it takes a village. So, if you can find your village, if you can find your tribe, to help you, it doesn't have to fall all on your shoulders. And know that your child appreciates your undivided attention, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes. I know with my kids, because I had so many of them, and I can remember my mom was from a big family, and she used to tell me that she would go to extreme lengths to get just 5 or 10 minutes of her mom's attention, by herself. So I really took that to heart when I had my kids. So, I had like Monday was Matthew's night and Tuesday was Emily's night. Like they had their special days. And I kept that up for years, where at least I knew in the week that each one of those kids got one evening where we cooked together, or they were in the kitchen with me. As they got older, they could take on more responsibility of the meal preparation. But we cooked together and we did things, and I really focused my attention on that one child. And at least I could say every week, like, we all find different ways to make it work. But the fact that you're so thoughtful about it, and you're trying, and you're thinking about it, you're not just sort of going through the motions of being a parent, is so important. And your kids know that. They recognize that about you. And I don't think our kids want us on them all the time either. Like, benign neglect. And I hope I don't get into trouble for this, but there's something to be said for that. And I read a really great book when my kids were young called Last Child in the Woods. And it was a story about how our kids spend way too much time indoors. And when they're outdoors, everything's so hyper supervised and so hyper controlled, all these settings. And really what kids love to do is explore the dark corners. They want to go to this behind the compost bin, and they want to do all of these things. And we should just supervise from a distance and let them have this risky play, because it's actually really important for their brain development and for the development of the front part of their brain, which controls impulse control and risk-taking behavior later on. And you might be supervising. So I did this, like, I have a backyard that was fenced in, so I could let my kids go outside, and I was in the window watching, but they thought they were out there by themselves. And I resisted the urge when I would see one doing something that might result in a scrape, or a bruise. I resisted the urge to go out and save them and just let them go through those processes. So we don't have to put pressure on ourselves to be there all the time, every minute, either. But just being thoughtful and present as much as we can is important.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's really big. And you touched on so many really good points. For starters, we do not live in an it takes a village society now. Culture has told us that you do it all on your own. And it's really unfortunate. And I see that a lot as like a parent myself now. And, I will ask for help. I'll be like, hey, mom, can you take the girls? And we're getting a little bit better with the schedule now. But before it was a lot of, well, I thought I already raised my kids and I didn't have this much help when I was a mom. And I was like, I love you too. Thanks, mom. But like, also that's what, culture is telling us now. We're supposed to do it all by ourselves. And I feel like personally, that's an unrealistic expectation, because in addition to, doing it all by ourselves, which they did 30 years ago, we have to work while we do it, and work on its own is a full-time job. And so our kids, and trying to put 2 full-time jobs in a 40-hour work week just doesn't fit.
And your full-time responsibility to your home, your property, meal planning, all of that. So we really have 3 full-time jobs. It's a challenge, and every family has to find their own routine. But if you can lean on people to help you, don't be afraid to ask for help. You're right. As culture tells us to be independent. I mean, we want our babies to become independent as early as possible. They're not supposed to be independent. They are supposed to be dependent on us. They're children, you know, and then that we're supposed to do everything by ourselves and do it with a smile and all of that. And
Oh, yeah.
we don't do ourselves any favors, and I think it's good that you're asking for help, and we learn things as we go. When I look back, I have things that I would tell myself about the clean house. If I was entertaining, everything had to be perfect. I'd make my family absolutely miserable before the guests arrived to have everything perfect, and then as soon as the first guest came through the door, it was like a switch went off. And I look back on that with some embarrassment now. I mean, my kids have great stories to tell.
It wasn't all bad.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you have to give them something to have a funny thing to tell about you. But yeah. And, kind of bringing it back to what I'm doing now with my lactation stuff is it's a lot of what I do is helping moms and dads, because there's a lot of dads that come to the lactation visits too, to understand what is normal behavior from their baby and to try and temper those expectations that they have of themselves. I do think that mothering is harder now with this generation of new mothers with social media. There's a lot of comparison and mom shaming that happens that you didn't have before. Like you didn't walk around with a computer in your pocket like we do now. So when you got home from work or when you were at home with your family, you were just at home with them. You didn't bring the whole world into the home with you. And certainly the comparing yourself or being shamed for different things, that just didn't really happen unless you were with a group of women and there was somebody who behaved that way. But so I think it's hard. I think it's really hard. And there's just a lot of expectation and a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility on women and fathers that doesn't have to be there.
And I think to kind of bring it full circle too, the best way to mitigate that almost is to look after yourself and to be a good parent in the sense of the fact that you feel confident in the decisions you are making for yourself as an individual and as a mother for your children and as for a family unit as a whole. I guess I do life a little bit differently according to, society and things like that, having kids with my exes and living with them and all of those other things. And yeah, we're back together now. So that kind of came full circle there. But being able to do that this time around with Rhett really felt different than before, where I was like, I don't want to tell people, I don't want to invite outside criticism into how I live my life. And this time I'm like, you know what? This is what's best for me and my family. And it really works. And we're happy. And I don't care if the world knows about it because I can take that criticism now or those, questioning eyes because I feel confident in the decisions I've made. And I feel confident because I have happy children and I am happy as an individual and, I'm healthy and I'm eating and I'm sleeping and all of those things. So it really helps in that way when you can kind of do those things for yourself.
Yeah. And one of the questions that I asked when I am doing in the initial visit is about self-care. What are you doing for self-care? And I'm as guilty of this myself. But I can't tell you how many times a mom looks at me and she has absolutely no idea. She hasn't even asked herself that question. What am I doing? What am I doing for self-care? Because we really do have to look after ourselves. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. I think we always think it has to be this big thing and then it becomes stressful because we need to fit the big thing in. It can be as little as
weekend spa days.
Exactly. It can be just sitting out on your front step with a beverage that you like, and taking some deep breaths at the end of the day after you've put your kids into bed. I am big about getting outside. We know that when you spend time outside in nature, that is so good for the soul and rejuvenating. But it can be 5 minutes doing that. It can be going to bed early. It can be saying, hey, I know it's only 8:30, but I'm exhausted. And why do I have to stay up until 10? What's the purpose of that? I'm going to go to bed early. It can be saying, hey, can you look after the kids for a night or an evening or whatever it is. Everybody's different what a self-care looks like, but it's important to take that time every single day for yourself.
And self-care for yourself as a parent looks the same as self-care for yourself as an entrepreneur too, honestly, because I find personally when I am up against, it's 8:30 and I really should stay up and keep working until 10, but my creativity and my brain is fried, then, I'm better off taking that time for myself because the next day I'm going to show up better for my business and for my kids because I've looked after myself. So I think that those are really the important things. And when people say, well, you can't run a business and you can't be a mom at the same time, I'm like, why not? And that's why I'm doing this podcast, because really to do one or the other, you need to put the same like practices and routines and steps in place to look after yourself and your kids and your business. And it's just kind of bringing awareness to all of those things.
Something that took me a long time to get to as a mom was when I go to bed tonight and I'm just before I close my eyes, do I feel good about the job that I did today? And if I don't, for whatever reason, then tomorrow is another day to correct that, to, try harder to do a different thing. And it took me a long time to not judge that based on anybody else's opinion or ideal of what a good mother or a good wife or a good housekeeper or a good anything looked like. It was, do I feel in myself that I gave all that I could, saved a little bit for myself, did I do a good job? Did the people around me know that I love them? And if I did, then I gave myself a pat on the back and that was the end of it. I think it's really important for people to do that, for women to do that, and mothers.
It is such good advice. And, it's kind of nice to talk to someone who has been there with multiple children and can really say, at the end of the day, even though motherhood is different for all 6 of my kids, this is kind of these are the things that I found worked well over the course of all of them. Yeah. So. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Lori. I feel like we really had a fantastic conversation that our listeners are going to enjoy. So for anyone that wants to know more about you shared your website earlier, birthwisewellness.com, and that's the best place for them to find you. By the way, I don't think we included this anywhere else in the podcast. Your business is called Birthwise Wellness.
I suppose that's important. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Lori works out of London. Her office is in London, but she helps women in the southwestern Ontario area. What's your coverage area?
Yeah, I do home visits as well in St. Thomas and Elgin area, all over London, and then sort of between London and St. Thomas and Elmer, anywhere in that area. And then I have my clinic that's near the LHSC hospital in center part of London as well. So I'm working on virtual visits. I haven't quite figured that part out yet, but I'm so hands-on that I haven't figured out how to do a good job of that. But if somebody was outside of my area and they really needed help, I would figure that out. I would make that work. So.
Well, thank you so much. And we will talk to you again soon. I think Lori should definitely come back. So I'll put a poll up in the comments of the podcast below. Make sure you drop any of the questions that you have after listening to our episode, and we will answer those in a second one.
Thank you so much for having me, Brittany.
You are most welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for tuning in to Go Get Great. I hope you found some useful tips and tricks that can help you make life and business work together. If what I said resonates with you, please share it on social media and don't forget to tag at Brittany Miller Socials so that I can celebrate you for taking those first steps towards achieving greatness. Remember, success doesn't happen overnight. It takes dedication, hard work, and a lot of spirit. So don't be afraid to dream big and go after what you want. Keep striving for greatness. You get closer with every step forward, no matter how small they may seem. Until next time, go get great.